Voting this area to be turned in the Chamber of Commerce, the City of Tulsa, and the Tulsa Real Estate Exchange. And the reason they say exchange is because they were trying to buy, trade, and take the land from the owners in Greenwood. That's what the exchange means when it says the Tulsa Real Estate Exchange. So that process was conceptualized to turn this whole area into an industrial area. And so as we proceed east from Greenwood Street, as we are now, we're just a couple of blocks deep east, we start to see the actual industrial area that came to fruition. And I don't know exactly when these were built. I do know that they were built pre-1950s. But the interesting thing about this particular building is that Evans Electrical Motor Company, and you can see the remnants of the sign on top. Well, the mayor at the time of the Tulsa race riot was T.D. Evans. So I've never gone to research the history of this building, but it wouldn't surprise me if Evans or one of his family members or relations had started this business on the land. And if not, it's just another one of those poetic coincidences that speak to the history. So now we're still on Archer. We're turning to the north now, and we'll be headed down Lansing to the north, which would have been the eastern boundary of historic Greenwood. And this whole area, because of these industrial businesses, became what the EPA called an environmental justice site, a quintessential environmental justice site. They said because of the pollution that these businesses created, the topsoil contained such high levels of lead and other toxins that the birth rate, the birth rate, it caused deficiency. The birth rate was lowered in men. The potency of their seed was diminished because of the pollution. It also caused minor birth defects in children, and that speaks to, this area. The topsoil was carried by the wind and contaminated, and that's known as the Brownsfield, I think it's the Evans-Brownsfield document, and that was put together by the Environmental Protection Agency I think it was 4 years ago. So this area is an EPA environmentally contaminated site. So this stretch of Lansing here would have had grocery stores, theater, barbershops. I think the Mann brothers had a record store. When I was in a city preservation meeting, the city preservation people said that Lansing was not a part of Greenwood. That Greenwood is, so we had photocopied businesses' addresses out of the phone book from the 1930s and showed them that yes, Mann Brothers Groceries was on Lansing, and provided them with the information to verify that Lansing was part of Greenwood. So this is just to show how in the modern day contemporary conversation about the history of Greenwood, there's just even a segregated memory of, or not even a memory, but even perception of what Greenwood is, what Greenwood was, and where Greenwood was and is. And this is by city preservation. This is by the professional historians and folks who are paid and made a career out of preserving Tulsa history. They seem to be unaware, or at least were to a certain, till recently, of what the actual historic boundaries of Greenwood were. So now we're going to go west on Pine, which according to the document was the northern border of historic Greenwood. I've also read that Pershing was another line, and that would have been just a little bit further north. So there may or may not have been other homes and businesses just a few blocks to the north, but it's generally agreed upon that Pine Avenue here was the northernmost boundary of Greenwood. So as you're watching this and we're driving through this area, this is the area that during the Tulsa Race Massacre, it was destroyed. Completely decimated, burned to the ground. All this, yeah. So it's basically, we're traveling a mile to the north, a mile to the west, a mile to the south, and then a mile back to from Cincinnati to Lansing. That's roughly the area. 40 city blocks. So if you take that into context of just what exists now, that half a city block, about 11 buildings down there on Greenwood, just south of 244, that's a very small percentage. It's like 1/80th of what was actually here in Greenwood. So now we've approached Cincinnati, which recently was changed to Martin Luther King Boulevard, and we're going to take a left and proceed south on Cincinnati / Martin Luther King Boulevard. And this is this was the line of segregation between what we now know as Brady Heights and the Greenwood Historic District. So to the west of Cincinnati, Martin Luther King, that we're going south on now, to this direction would have been wealthy, affluent white residences, as well as the Klan Hall was right over here. So this was white Tulsa to the right, and to the left it would have been the historic Greenwood area. We're approaching Ben Hill Park, and Ben Hill was a pastor and a leader in North Tulsa, very involved in the civil rights movement. This is his the park that is now called Hill Park, but this is one of 3 parks in North Tulsa that the federal funding has somehow or another disappeared from accountability. And there's an current attempt to destroy Springdale, Ben Hill Park, and B.C. Franklin Park. B.C. Franklin is probably one of the most important figures in the resurrection of Greenwood after the massacre. The city passed a city ordinance saying that the residents and the business leaders of Greenwood could not rebuild their community with non-commercial materials, meaning that unless they rebuilt with brick, concrete, or steel, they couldn't rebuild. Well, the majority of structures in Greenwood were wood, so that was the attempt in the city ordinance that was passed to prevent the residents from building. B.C. Franklin was one of a handful of lawyers that overturned that city ordinance and had it thrown off the law books in Tulsa so that the residents could rebuild. So without B.C. Franklin, Tate Brady, the Chamber of Commerce, and the City of Tulsa, and the Tulsa Real Estate Exchange's wishes to move African Americans out of the Greenwood area would have succeeded. And so that park commemorates his history. And it's been neglected by the city, and federal funds that were allocated to restore the park and maintain the park were not used for those purposes. And in fact, now nobody really knows where those funds went. Okay, so now we're about to come to Archer, and we're going to pass over Archer, because Greenwood did extend a little bit further south, just like it extended a little bit north of Pine. And if you look through my window as we go over the bridge, you're going to see these bronze plaques. And these bronze plaques are all over the Greenwood area and North Tulsa. And they commemorate businesses that were destroyed during the Tulsa Race Massacre. So this is Cincinnati, Martin Luther King. And so you can see all these, and then they stop right up here as we get to the tracks. So you can see them here. And every plaque you see was someone's livelihood. It was an independent business. These were African-American entrepreneurs in 1921 that had built this community and were financially independent of the majority of Tulsa, or the city of Tulsa. So now we've crossed over the tracks, which, like in a lot of American cities, you know, the other side of the tracks is how they say it. That was the line of segregation, and defined North Tulsa from South Tulsa, and still does to this day. The city street would be Admiral is the line of demarcation on a map, but Admiral is just on the other side of the tracks. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go back into the Greenwood area, and I'm going to show you how the traditional historic boundaries of Greenwood were taken in 2010 when the Brady District, through the George Kaiser Family Foundation, Wallace Engineering, City Preservation, and State Preservation offices successfully had the historic registry proposal approved. And it's interesting to note that as we cross those tracks on Martin Luther King, the name stops. So Martin Luther King Boulevard only exists in North Tulsa. It does not proceed to the south and go through South Tulsa, which is just another one of these, to me, they're like poetic symbols that speak to the lack of integration geographically that Tulsa still to this day represents. So it's almost to say that Martin Luther King's legacy is only for African Americans, which is completely against, if you ever read or heard him speak, it would be contrary to his actual legacy of his life and his work. So all of these things that we're seeing down here, all of this development, the Woody Guthrie and his legacy, Martin Luther King and his legacy, these icons of progressive and unification and civil rights and workers' rights and all these symbols and icons are just being used for marketing. They're not actually being used to integrate or to speak to the actual history of the working class here in Tulsa or African Americans. They're being used to symbolically represent that. And some might argue that, you know, it's a first step or, you know, whatever, but I don't see it that way. I see it as it's a facade. And it's just like when they invite African American artists over to AHA or to Living Arts or any of these places. These people are standing behind keeping Brady's name as part of the legacy of this area, and at the same time trying to say that they're integrating. On a surface level, they definitely are. But when you get down to it and you really start talking about reconciliation, which at its core is about the relinquishment of power and privilege for unification, and to stand behind the Brady name and the Brady districting is the exact opposite of that. That is where the power structures money came from. This is old oil money that built these foundations. The Chapman Foundation, George Kaiser Family Foundation. George Kaiser, his first business he inherited from his parents, and he ran Kaiser Francis Oil, and then he bought Bank of Oklahoma in 1989. So the history of the disparity of wealth that was created by the 1921 race massacre, the wealth of the Greenwood area that was destroyed and never compensated in any way, that didn't happen in White Tulsa, and that wealth was able to build, and now it's philanthropic, and it has built this area over here. So when you look at this development from the history of Greenwood and North Tulsa, it's a complete slap in the face. It's like it commemorates actually the segregation, the racism, and the lack of reconciliation and justice that has occurred since the 1921 race massacre. So now we're going to walk these boundaries, and I'm going to show you some of the areas that are now in Brady that are historically Greenwood.